Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Thought Leaders. I'm your host, Chris Shang, and today we have Jason Loomis, who is the CISO over at Freshworks, or Chief Information Security Officer. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me, Chris.
Of course, for those who are not aware, why don't you tell us a little bit about what Freshworks is, what you guys do, what kind of companies you guys work with?
Sure. Half of the time I get that we're a grocery shopping service. The other half of the time, if you work in tech, you kind of know who we are. We're a software SaaS software provider. We provide ITSM. So our niche is that if you're familiar with most ITSM products, I won't mention brands, they're a nightmare in complexity. Ours is just bonehead simple to use. And then we do CX software as well, Freshdesk, which is actually how we started. Been around for about 12 years. We're a publicly traded company, went IPO about 2 years ago.
Yep.
And yeah, loving it over here.
Very cool. Um, Before we kind of talk about your area of expertise, we'd love to kind of just get the backstory around how you ended up in security space in the first place. Did you start off as an engineer? What did that look like? What was the intrigue behind that, and even just this foray into this part of your this interest in this space?
Yeah, I did not start in security. I started in tech, and specifically, probably my niche was networking.
Okay.
So I used to build networks and then got into building data centers, worked in banking and finance in the Bay Area. That's where I got my heavy chops, and it's probably in it for about 10 to 11 years when I had luck. It's the luck is often a confluence of opportunity, right? So certain things happen in a certain way at a certain time. And I got lucky to be able to take advantage of it because I had wanted to pivot in security because I knew that was up and coming at the time. I'm dating myself, but I started in tech back when, okay, firewall check, antivirus check, you're secure. It has evolved a lot since then.
Yep.
So I got lucky by a confluence of events. I met my mentor, who's one of my best friends now, who came from 10 years of experience in the cyberspace, wrote books in cyber. I met him. I met another mentor, a guy named Gene Kim up in Portland, Oregon. Went back to school for my MBA at that time, which is where I met Paul Love, who was the mentor. Met these guys who gave me the ideas and sort of mentored me about how I can pivot into security. And luckily I got a job that allowed me to do it. That was probably the big chunk, is that I had a job that looked for, to quote Liam Neeson, my unique skills. I had this unique skills of both IT operations, and I did have enough of a security background knowledge set that they needed both. So my first real security gig was building out a multiple sclerosis registry SharePoint platform as a service for Providence Hospitals up in Oregon. And then it just was able to take off from there. Again, it was just lucky opportunities. My first CISO gig, they needed someone who could come in and do the IT operations and engineering side, build that team up and out, and then take over security. So that was a great opportunity. That was Fabletics, big fast fashion e-commerce business that I saw grow from 100 million up to about 750 million when I left, and was able to build out IT operations because I had that experience. And then I fully pivoted over to being their chief information security officer.
Got it. Um, For those that are not familiar with cybersecurity or security in general in the tech space, what does that typically entail for you in terms of, uh, obviously large data sets and securing that, but what does it typically mean if you're to explain it to general layperson?
Sure. Like, what would you say you do here? What do
Yeah,
I do?
or explaining, I guess, what the role of security plays in an organization.
It That is not as an easy of a question as it sounds, to be
I
honest.
know. I
Every
know.
organization can look at security differently.
Exactly.
What I do, and probably this is, I'd say, 70 to 80% of CISOs, there's really, for typical technical technology companies like SaaS companies like myself, we really are protecting two things. We're protecting the company's data and our customers' data. It's
Mhm.
really those two important things. It's the data, and we're also protecting, making sure that our services are available. So a lot of, you hear about ransomware, for example. Not only can it take the data, which is a problem, but then it could affect your servicing and, you making money, right? If you're running a restaurant and you can't open your doors to business, you're losing revenue. That happens to companies if their data is being ransomware and held, and brings down systems. So I try to, as best I can, reduce the risk of that occurring.
Got it. And walk us through, I guess, a little bit more of, I know you kind of dated yourself in terms of like how security's evolved over the past several years into decades, but going back, how have you seen those cycles change as it relates to how fast like technology has grown, right? Is it and I think about this especially with AI, right? I think like there's a lot of companies that are focusing right now on building the data infrastructure to leverage the potential what generative AI can do, but at the same time, you're having a lot of companies that are focusing on the security component of that too, because as quickly as organizations are trying to leverage it for good, there's also bad actors in the space that are trying to leverage it to do bad things. And so how do you look at security's role in managing the evolutions or the growth of technology, and how does it play, how does it keep up to speed?
Yeah. I think what you'll find is what I've found is that security doesn't really change that much. There's these basic things you do in security. How you might do them if it's an AI, if you're working with AI, how you're doing that might be different, but they're still the basic concepts. Like for example, let's use your house. 20 years ago, you would have a key, you'd have to get a locksmith to change a key to get into your house and a lock. Today, you've got a different type of lock. You got one that's got Wi-Fi to your phone or Bluetooth to your phone or a fingerprint. It's still a lock. And the security basic principle is lock your door, lock your windows. There might be different ways to do it. That analogy kind of works with some of the new technologies and new things that we're seeing. Is it's still about the basics? Like, do you have one of the biggest basic things is you can't protect what you don't know you have. So one of the basic things we want to do is inventory. Understand what data do we have? Where is it? What systems are we trying to protect? Start with that, because without even knowing situational awareness. So either you're running AI or you're running, a customer call center. Where's all the data that you're holding? Where does it sit? What systems are you trying to protect? That's like a first basic concept. And there's other controls that we stack on top of that. But really, it hasn't changed much, to be honest, in the last 10 to 20 years. It's still about the basics. If you do the basics really well, everything else kind of falls into place, in my opinion.
Got it. Would you say that part of your, maybe it's not a challenge necessarily, but part of the role for you is to keep on top of the hows of you keep those things locked? Um,
Yes.
and,
Yes.
and where are you going to learn best practices around that? Or as the more senior you become, the more in a leadership role you are you helping to define what some of those things are, in terms of like best practice for making sure things are secure?
Well, in our industry, luckily, there's a lot of the work has already been done for us. There's such great frameworks out there that you can use. There's my favorite is the CIS Top 18 Critical Security Controls. It's just a great foundation for what to do. If you're like, what do I do? Where do I start? How do I secure things? You start with that. NIST is another famous framework that has just great stuff. So it's, I don't have to come in and think things fresh. It's more of you pull from different frameworks to create sort of your own approach and security that might be unique to your organization or your technology stack.
Yeah. And then how about say like internationally, right? Like, because there's different regulations, different types of governance across the globe in terms of how they look at it. How do you think about that for Freshworks, but also maybe just from a more high level standpoint, like how do you think about it as it relates to just how companies should be approaching that? One, if they are already have an international presence, or two, they're looking to expand internationally.
Yeah,
How,
find out what the regulations are in the country you're trying to do business with. Get a good, we call that, typically you call that governance, risk, and compliance is sort of a subsection or a part of what cybersecurity does, and get yourself a good GRC person to help you. Yeah, it can be overwhelming. Freshworks does business, and I'm not even going to pick a randomly 50, 55 countries. And we do have to keep abreast of regulations. For example, Italy just released a new regulation that says any company that's a software company like us doing business with a government agency has to have a specific ISO certification. So that's part of my job. That's why CISOs are here, and that's what we're supposed to do is know where we're doing business and then understand what the regulations and requirements are, and then talk to the business about, hey, is this something we want to pursue? Is it worth getting the certification just because they require it? Maybe we only have 2 customers in Italy, so it's not even, there's so many. So the business side of things that apply to that as well. But yeah, you definitely need to be aware of where you're doing business
Yeah,
and who your customers are. Because within those countries, like United States, wow, FedRAMP, if you're familiar with doing business with the federal government or federal agencies, they have a whole set of things you need to do. If you're working with certain states, things like TexRAMP, Virginia, CoveRAMP, there's all these different things that you need to be aware of. But that's why we're pretty well paid in security.
there you go. Uh, and just kind of your, your day to day, or I guess your role now, like of your, how much of your time is actually spent on kind of like, again, staying abreast of the best practices and making sure that as the company scales and grows, that you guys are staying compliant, but also being protective around all the data sets, versus, ad hoc issues that come up that are threatening, security of the company, whether that's like, ransomware or customer data or company data, where you have to be more agile and, you're solving unique problems on the spot. How does that break up? And has there been any issues like that you've had to deal with, that, keeps you on, I guess, keeps you on your toes, but also just like having to solve for it? And what is that experience like?
Yeah. So this is probably an unfair statement, but this is specific to my experience. I've worked for 3 companies now, and I talk to my peers consistently across the board. And I'd say on average, it tends to be indicative of your maturity and security. The
Mm,
more mature you are, the less likely you're going to have to face these firefighting or be reactive security,
yep,
reacting to things, because you have a better basic we call them controls, these things that you do right. Remember that inventory, for example. You do inventory really well. You have endpoint detection and response, the new antivirus on all laptops. Like, you've got these really basic controls. So the likelihood of getting breached is a lot less. Where when you have more immature security programs, you could be having a security incident where you're getting breached every other day or every other week. And I've been in a seat like that before, where you've had to face these things all the time because you just didn't really have good maturity. So the more mature you are, the more likely you are to not have that happen and be able to focus. But that's why it's so hard. Like, sometimes you get more notoriety, and your visibility as a CISO is, look at all these fires I put out. That's actually not great, right? That's not
yeah,
not what you want to do. You're going to get burnt out. Your team's going to get burnt out, and your job is going to have to convince the business, like, this is great that we're really good at these incidents, and we're making sure bad things after they happen, but I need some funding to try to prevent this
yeah,
stuff from happening. And I should make a good argument for you to say, hey, we really got to focus on these basics first.
yeah. I mean, and that makes sense, right? I think that's also kind of like the evolution, how you get into the CISO place in the position in the first place, is just the having worn those war badges to a certain degree and having gone through those experiences, and then being able to level up as you graduate through your career. But that being said, with the previous instances that you've worked in, other situations where it has been putting out a lot of fires, because we do also have a lot of, earlier stage companies that are not as mature as
Mhm.
Freshworks is, and not a publicly traded company. But like, at what point do you typically see um, that balance strike a chord where senior leadership and the executive side of things are now knowing that security has to be prioritized? At like what side, and this might differ based on like industry and verticals, but like, I would imagine like certain size of companies all of a sudden have to start worrying about that. And usually that's triggered by like growth and the growth of the company, and they're not able to mature or like move more upstream in terms of the types of customers that they want to acquire, unless they have certain things in place around security. But I don't know if that's something that I'm speaking out of place, or you've seen that happen in real time in front of you.
I've seen that in real time completely. So there's a couple things. When if you have a company that's a startup and they're facing a bunch of incidents, it can affect partnerships. Means people won't want to partner with you. It can affect deals in the pipe. Like, boy, we almost had this deal and we lost it. They said, no, we just read you're on BuzzFeed. Is BuzzFeed even still around? I don't keep up.
Yep.
Just read you on BuzzFeed that you just got breached. No, we're not going to do business with you. So when it affects deals or affects potential revenue for that growth number, that's when you'll get the businesses notice and be like, okay, maybe we need to invest more in security. And typically unfortunately, this doesn't happen this way. in the real world, what ideal is if they want to move into a new market, or we want to go after enterprise. Well, enterprise, look at our peers. Let's say, for example, Freshworks, we compete with ServiceNow. ServiceNow has every certification on the planet, probably some I don't even know about, and ones they just made up. I'm kidding about the made up, but they have everything because they compete in that hey, we got that. If you're a startup and up and coming, you kind of want to look and go, okay, well, if we want to compete with ServiceNow, we're going to need that same security posture because we're going to be compared with them, right? That's who we're competing against, and it's sort of a basic hygiene factor that you need to have. So I recommend to startups is you go look at your peers, look at you're competing against, and what markets you're trying to get into, and what are the basic security requirements you're going to need for that. And it's also often cybersecurity certifications like SOC 2 Type 2 or ISO.
Yeah. This is gonna taking a little bit of a step back now, but when you wanted to get involved in security, you got your mentors in place. This is maybe for somebody that is more junior, that was in a very similar position as you, where you wanted to enter in and focus more on security. What spurred that initially, that interest to go more niche into that space? And then also, you mentioned you had mentors that guided you. What exactly how did they help guide you in terms of getting your foot through that door?
What got me into it, I'll quote Indiana Jones, "Fortune and glory, kid, fortune and glory." It honestly, I knew that it was new and exciting. And
Yeah.
so I was kind of bored. I felt like I've already mastered IT. I was looking for something new. And I did know that this is where the career growth is going to be over the next 10 to 20. Boy, was I right? That was 12 years ago. I was like, I think security is going to really take off soon. And sure enough, like it just, so that's the luck part where I kind of just, yeah, that sounds really cool. And it wasn't like I had to retool everything that I knew. Everything that I knew applied to it. Versus if I wanted to go, like, I'll tell you, I haven't coded since college. I couldn't code my way out of a paper bag. So if you were to tell me back 12 years ago, okay, go into coding, I had no basis for it. I'm like, I don't even know what applies, but my general technology area absolutely applied in security, and everything that I knew from technology in a day-to-day existence applies in security. So that's what really helped me pivot. I forgot you had a second half of your
The
question.
second half of it was, you had aligned yourself with mentors that helped you break into this field. What did they tell you, or how did they guide you into it? Was it, purely the relationship, or was it like, this is the path forward, these are the steps to take?
Yeah, this is a really good question. I don't think anybody's ever asked me that. What exactly did they do for me? If anything, they gave me the courage. They said, this isn't as hard as you think. Trust me, it's the what's the Michael Jordan thing, the imposter syndrome. They both had it. I'm like, dude, you've written 10 books on security. How do you have it? He's like, every day, I don't know what I'm doing. And so really part of that was just talking to them, on a personal basis about their experience. And it's like, you know what? One of the best advices I ever got was my CTO over at Textile. And he said, and I believe it. Fake it till you make it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I can say, yes, I can do that. And then you go figure it out. And you know what? You fail, you pick yourself back up, you learn from it, and you try again. So
Yeah.
if anything, it was probably just their friendship and helping me.
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, I think it's probably, it's probably underrated, but the people you surround yourself with definitely has an impact on your confidence and I think that feeds into so many other things, your work ethic, and then your natural curiosity, how quickly you're able to learn things, having a sounding board, all those things add up pretty quickly if you take all the little pieces of what that leads into.
Yeah.
On layering on top of that real quick would just be, as you've kind of gone into this more like leadership role, managing teams and larger teams as you grow in your career, what is the skill set that you feel like, because everybody we've talked to on this show has been a leadership role of some sort, right? And the skill set required to be a great leader is very different a lot of times than whatever the core competence is of what they're a leader in, right? So like, even if you're talking about a leader in sales or marketing or HR or in security, like when you start managing people or you start working with people, there's a different type of skill set involved. What does that look like for you, and how did you level up on those skill sets? Or was it something that was more innate in you that allowed you to then move up the ladder into senior leadership?
Yeah. Great questions. Um, for one, there's no roadmap. There's no, here's what you need to do to become a leader. I don't believe it's innate. I believe it's something people can learn. How I started learning was by bad managers and bad leaders I had in my past. I
Yeah.
absolutely, you can learn as much from a bad leader than you can a good leader, because you take whatever they did and do the opposite. Like, and so that helped a lot. So I had an idea. I worked in the restaurant industry for about 8 to 10 years before I got into tech. So I used to manage there. So I had a kind of a management experience, and that helped me as well. It doesn't help up and comers. You go like, how do I go learn about leadership and management? Read, read, read. There's libraries of books that people will recommend about leadership. I'm a big history and case study fan. So
Mm.
go read your history books about Eisenhower, go read about JFK, how they led, read these case study stories, read about Google back in the day of, how their culture was. There's just so many great stories out there that you can pull from, and the ideas about how they did it. And then you take yourself in that situation, you go, okay, what would I do in this situation? Another good one is that's a great point, that the golden rule. How would you as an employee, because if most of you will have worked as a team member before, how would you want to be treated, and how would you want your manager to interact with you? And just flip that and do that with your team members.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're alluding to two words that typically come up around that is like empathy and compassion, which again,
Yes.
hopefully is innate in most people, but it's not actually, I think like you see this a lot with like I think the bad managers and bad leaders where or poor leaders, poor managers. But like I mean, I think especially around sales where they are great individual contributors, but then when you start putting them from that kind of position where it's like all merit based into then managing people, it doesn't translate over. Um and I'm curious for you is like about the empathy and compassion part of putting yourself into that other person's shoes or imagining how you would want to be. Like, was that something that you've again like learned through osmosis from reading, or do you feel like that's always kind of been instilled in you, or did you see that as like a strong trait in the leaders that you did aspire to?
Man, yeah, this is not a light podcast. I like this. That's a very deep question.
I mean, but that's like how we interact, right? I mean, it's
Yeah,
when you're looking for to maximize potential out of a person, regardless of whatever department that is, right? Like these are now the interpersonal optimizations that we're looking
yeah,
for, and sometimes it's not as easily quantifiable, but we want to be able to learn what those skill sets are, how to identify
yep.
where those gaps are in ourselves. And I think, obviously as you mature too, like self-awareness becomes very critical as part of that learning process also.
Yeah. So I was not a nice person growing up as a kid. So I wasn't this innate, oh boy, this guy is just meant to
Yeah.
be a chief information security officer. And I take pride in my leadership capabilities now. I have my team, really thinks highly of me. And I'm not just making that up. I'm sure a lot of people say that. Like they do. And I lead great teams, and I respect my team so much. I was never like that back in you. So I mean, as a 22-year-old, I was a shit show. I was terrible. I was a jerk. I wasn't nice. So this idea that is leadership innate? Absolutely not. You can
Mhm.
absolutely become a good leader. What did it for me was a book really changed my mindset about the golden rule of morality and empathy. It was called The Science of Good and Evil by a guy named Michael Shermer, and he's a evolutionary psychologist. And when I understood about where human behavior came from, of why we lie, cheat, gossip, steal, and the motivation for that, and realizing, okay, there's no such thing as evil or good. It's human behavior, and you can change your human behavior based on your mindset. And that just really got me into that path of, okay, there's a bigger picture to this of why am I feeling angry in a meeting at someone? Oh, it's because of these thoughts behind my head, and started tackling it with that. And then book after book, you mentioned something just now about salespeople. Funny that there's a book that I really like called Drive by a guy named Daniel Pink, and it's about how do you motivate people to do the best. And they say you need these three things: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. If you give an employee these three things, let them be the best of what they can do. That's mastery. Let them be autonomous. Here's the goal. Go do it. You set your day. And then a sense of purpose for what they're doing. You're going to have this golden employee and golden team member. What it doesn't apply to is sales. Sales are so financially motivated. So when you threw that in there, I was like, oh yeah, I don't know anything about sales teams or how you motivate or lead that. Everybody else, I'm a pretty good leader.
There you go. That's great. Those are the things I think are very tangible for people to pick up on. And that book, if you, we'll share that too. But I think that's everybody has a kind of like that epiphany moment, and it can come from a book, it can come from a mentor, it can come from some personal experience a lot of times too, where
Yeah.
uh, triggered by a loss or something of that nature. Um, Next thing I kind of just want to talk about, jumping back into more of what your path is like now. What would be the new trend that you're seeing across technology now? Um, you leapt into security because you saw that as a fast growing field. What do you think is that growing field as it would have relate back to what it was for you nowadays?
Oh, like what's the new thing to get
Yeah,
into?
what's the new thing that you're hearing, in for like people who are coming out of, IT or engineering, what have you, and like where's that specialty or that next area of focus?
I mean, this is a you know exactly what's going to come out of my mouth. It's AI. That is absolutely where everything is going right now. To give it a fair shake, it could change, right? Like it could be in another couple of years. It was VR, right? For
Yeah,
a
yeah,
good
yeah.
2, 3 years, VR.
Yeah.
That's where all the money's going. If AI doesn't pan out in 2, 3 years, we could pivot. But right now, it's artificial intelligence. And right now, I believe that the difference in 5 years from now, the companies that are successful are the ones that are successfully using AI in their day-to-day business, and the ones that aren't going to be successful are the ones that are not. So I think it's absolutely comes core. I've got my team to do 25% of their work using AI for next year. That's a goal that we have to figure out how to do it and make our lives easier. I use it and it's made my life so much easier.
Got it. Would you mind drilling down into like how you're using it, and then how are you encouraging your teams to leverage it for productivity?
Sure. Here's a great example. I used this the
Yeah.
other day and I was like, this is amazing. It's so I was using ChatGPT. So let's use the Italy example. The Italy was but it wasn't Italy, it was another country, had a regulation that came out, and there's a notification period with the regulation. But the notification period is for this concept of a data owner, which is our customers, for example, would be a data owner. We are the data processor. So this is a common GDPR privacy concept is as a company of the SaaS, we process data, but technically you're the one that went and got the data, you own it. So there's a notification period in this regulation that a customer of ours was saying, "Hey, I need a 1 day notification for breaches." And I'm like, I just can't, I'm not built to handle that. I can't do 1 day. I can do 48 hours at best. So I was like, oh, I got to go read this 38-page legal document to figure out what the notification period really is. I fed it into ChatGPT because it's a public document, PDF, fed it in. I said, hey, what's the notification period for a SaaS company providing services to blah, 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 blah. Gave me the answer. And I said, oh, and what's the reference? Cite it. And it showed me exactly where in the document it said and why it said it and saved me a good hour to an hour and a half of work.
Oh wow, that's amazing. And similar kind of use cases, you're hoping your team can utilize that.
Yeah,
In
AI is great at, especially
Yep,
LLMs are great at analyzing text. So
yep,
anytime you got to read through, or another example, my team spent, I used to take pride in this because I built this unique way to do policies, which if you've ever read a security policy, you might as
yep.
well read an insurance policy. They're horrible. They're overwritten. Nobody ever reads them. We've spent 3 day offsite rewriting them into very short, measurable, smart. So yeah, so measurable, applicable statements that everybody can understand with mapping them to all the different control sets, blah, blah, blah. Now that's a great use of AI. Hey, here's our current policies. Here's a sample of what I want them to look like. Go do the work, and then
Yep.
it'll spit out at least it may not be 100%. I'm ready to go with it, but a couple hours of review and editing, and then I've got something that just saved me probably 3 days of time.
That's amazing. Well, we're up on time, but I wanted to say thank you so much for making yourself available. That was and making yourself accessible in that way of just diving a little bit deeper and sharing a little bit more of your narrative and your story around how it humanizes, I think, the experience a little bit for people to hear it from you in that way. But I want to say thank you for taking the time out of your day and spending some time with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show, Chris. This is great. I really
Thank
appreciate it.
you. Yeah.